Demonic possession, the theory that a force or entities not of this world can take control, manipulate, and consume a person. It's a phenomena that's perplexed and scared people for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And today, we will be taking a look at 10 of the scariest demonic possession stories we could find. But before we get into the video, don't forget to leave us a comment below, like, share, and subscribe with the bell so that you never miss a video. Number 10. A woman named Julia. Dr. Richard Gallagher, a board-certified psychiatrist and medical professor among other titles, was consulted by the Catholic Church to provide a skeptical medical analysis to include if peoples being investigated for demonic possession were mentally ill. Gallagher, who investigated hundreds of cases, had one in particular that still puzzles him to this day. Under the guise of anonymity, the subject of the case was given the name of Julia. The events took place roughly in 2010. Julia was a self-proclaimed high priestess of a satanic cult, and the night before Dr. Gallagher was supposed to meet her to begin his analysis, he was in his study with his wife at about 3 a.m. in the morning. He had 2 cats who often stayed by their side. These cats started to go berserk. They went berserk in a way that they had never seen before. Mystified, the Gallaghers dismissed the strange behavior and went to bed. The following morning, as Dr. Gallagher was introduced to Julia for the first time, the first words out of her mouth were, "Hey Doc, how did you like those cats last night?" Having never met the woman before, he was absolutely bewildered. And strange happenings and otherworldly knowledge continued during his investigation. She would often tell him how patients of his had passed away, as well as the cause of death for his own mother. In one instance, while Julia was roughly 1,000 miles away, while the doctor and one of the priests were having a conversation on a landline, the same voice that had been coming out of Julia came over their call. The voice proclaimed that she was theirs and to stop their work at once. Perplexed and very weirded out, the doctor asked the priest if he heard what the voice was saying, and the priest replied with yes. The entities can even interrupt our phone calls. After exhibiting a wide range of bizarre behavior, such as superhuman strength, multiple voices, multiple languages, and unknown intelligence, the doctor had to finally conclude that Julia was absolutely demonically possessed. She in fact today has been the worst case the church and the doctor have ever seen. Number 9. The Loudun possessions. One of the most notorious cases of possession came from the French village of Loudun in the 17th century. An entire convent of nuns seemed to be possessed by a plethora of high-level demons. The case started after the start of the trial of a parish priest named Irving Grandier. Grandier was on trial for having made a pact with Satan, what was clearly becoming a very scary spectacle at the time. The mass exorcisms of the nuns were included in the trial itself, and the nuns exhibited an array of demonic behavior. The nuns would also proposition the priest in the most lewd ways possible, and it was finally concluded that Grandier had indeed made a pact with the devil. He was horribly tortured by all means available at the time, and was eventually burned at the stake, although Grandier never admitted to having made a pact with the devil. The nuns continued to be possessed and were publicly exorcised for months after. This finally concluded with the main exorcist having claimed to take all the demons into his body, and shortly after this, he seemed to undergo an intense physical and mental decline and expired just weeks after. Up next we have number 8, the possession of Clara Germana Seal. Clara Germana Seal is said to have been possessed when she was 16 years old as a schoolgirl at the St. Michael's Mission in natal South Africa. The girl was an orphan of African origin and was baptized as an infant. At the age of 16, the girl made a pact with Satan, and this is said to be the cause of her demonic possession. Clara later revealed this information to her confessor, Father Horner Erasmus. In an account written by a nun, Clara was said to be able to speak multiple languages, of which she had no previous knowledge. This fact was also witnessed by others, who recorded that she understood Polish, German, French, and indeed all other languages. The nun reported that Clara demonstrated clairvoyance by revealing the most intimate secrets and transgressions of people whom she had no contact with. Moreover, Clara could not bear the presence of blessed objects and seemed imbued with extraordinary strength and ferocity, often hurling the nuns about the convent rooms and beating them up. The nun reported that the girl's cries had a savage bestiality that astonished those around her. In regards to the girl's voice, an attending nun even wrote this: "No animal had ever made such sounds, neither the lions of East Africa nor the angry bulls. At times, it sounded like a veritable herd of wild beasts orchestrated by Satan and forming a hellish choir." The girl, according to some, was said to have levitated 5 feet in the air, sometimes vertically and sometimes horizontally. When sprinkled with holy water, the girl was reported to have come out of this state, and according to the Lutheran Pastoral Handbook, one possessing these symptoms is an indication that the individual is truly possessed. Consequently, 2 Roman Catholic priests were appointed to perform an exorcism, and the deliverance lasted for 2 days. During the exorcism, Clara's first action was to knock the Holy Bible from the priest's hands and grab his stole in an attempt to choke him with it. But at the end of the exorcism, it was said that the demon was forced out, and the girl was healed. Number 7. The possession of Michael Taylor. Michael Taylor and his wife Christine lived in a small town in Great Britain called Ossett. The couple was very religious and had joined a Christian prayer group led by Mary Robinson. At one meeting in 1974, Christine Taylor accused her husband and Robinson of having an affair, which both people hotly denied. Michael Taylor then spewed obscenities and began acting extremely erratic and out of character, leading witnesses to think that he was possessed by the devil. After months of crazy behavior, Taylor eventually consulted with clergy who performed an exorcism. The exorcism lasted for well over 24 hours, and the priests involved claimed to have removed 40 demons from the man's body. However, before he left, the priests warned him that the demon of murder remained dormant in his soul. As soon as Taylor arrived home, he brutally murdered his wife and their dog, and he was later found wandering the streets covered in blood. At his trial, he was acquitted by reason of insanity. Number 6. George Lukens, the Y'tan Demonic. George Lukens was as plain as a young man as you could find, 26 years old, a tailor by profession, and a part-time courier to make ends meet. Living in North Somerset, he was well known for being friendly, a helpful member of the community, and he could be found at church every Sunday morning, and he often participated in the Christmas pageant each December. That all changed when during the pageant of Christmas in 1760, an invisible force threw him several feet, and he awoke as something more than just a plain young man, introducing the 7 demons of the Y'tan Demonic. At first, Lukens began to exhibit strange symptoms. His skin grew pale, and he had convulsions regularly. Although this grew to be a very bizarre spectacle, although exhibiting clear physical symptoms of pain, he had a large and scary-looking grin when he experienced these episodes, often accompanied with the whites of his eyes. After a stint in a hospital under intense medical scrutiny, having not been diagnosed with an illness, Lukens was allowed to return home, and by this time the voices became stronger and more clearly audible, at times singing in strange sounds reminiscent of a language that could not be recognized. It would later be discovered that he was in fact singing all 200 words of the Te Deum in original Latin, inverted, meaning the Latin words were placed in reverse order, with each word pronounced backwards. And George Lukens did not speak Latin. He proclaimed that he was possessed by 7 demonic powers led by the devil himself, and it would take 7 holy men to banish them. Now, as the church began to get involved, Reverend Joseph Easterbrook found his 6 men of God, which along with himself made a total of 7. George Lukens was brought to Temple Church in Bristol, and on Friday the 13th of June 1778, the 7 clergymen began their exorcism of Mr. Lukens. Upon the beginning of the rites, George Lukens calmed and spoke in a powerful voice not previously heard as one of the 7 demons. That voice spoke directly to the clergymen and stated that the torment of George Lukens would be 1,000 times worse for trying such a foolish attempt at an exorcism. After hours of horrible screams, violent fits, and threats, the 7 demons seemed to have been freed by the clergymen. The case garnered considerable attention from the press and the scientific community alike. It was written about in many books, but no mention was ever made of George Lukens after Friday the 13th. It seems from the immediate description that the torments, the seizures, and speaking in tongues were all gone. But the question is, does that mean the demons were gone as well? Number 5. Arne Johnson. It is quite rare to see criminal cases defending the criminal's demonic possession, yet that is what lawyer Martin Manila tried to do when Arn Cheyenne Johnson murdered Alan Bono. It all began when Arn Johnson moved in with his partner Debbie Gatzel in 1980 with her family in Brookfield, Connecticut. David, her younger brother, was beginning to change his behavior, becoming more violent and dark. At age 11, he was having terrifying dreams at night, and he was convinced that a demon was chasing him, and accompanied that with paranormal phenomenon taking place in the house. He described him as an old man who resents his soul and an evil entity that regularly attacked him. His mother even saw him being thrown out of bed and strangled by invisible hands. The Gatzel family then called on the Warren family, who were well-known demonologists in the United States, famous for paranormal cases they had been handling for many years, and the phenomena increased shortly after their arrival. The Warrens ended up contacting a Catholic priest and were able to successfully exorcise the boy, but whatever entities that left David seemed to have gone right into Arn. He would later describe a black figure whose eyes were the blackest he had ever seen, staring directly into his soul. Arn was traumatized after this point and then began to have seizures. After this, the behavior started. The couple's landlord began to get complaints of loud screams and banging noises coming from the couple's apartment. So when he went to serve them an eviction notice, Arn, in a trance, grabbed a butcher knife and stabbed him over 20 times in the chest. Arn apparently had no memory of the event, and the Warrens contacted and assisted with his defense. His attorney apparently also had experienced very strange phenomena at his law office and home following his involvement. The courts ultimately decided that Arn was not possessed and sentenced him to 20 years, and he never psychologically recovered. Number 4. Guten Leben Didas. Growing up in a small religious village in Germany in the 1800s, Guten Leben Didas was a fairly normal small-town girl. That was until she began to hear scratching noises, which were shortly followed up by entering a trance-like state. Shortly after, the home was deemed haunted, and religious figures contacted. 2 priests were quickly dispatched and an exorcism commenced, and that's when things truly got nuts. Didas became incredibly violent and broke her restraints several times. She screamed when coming into contact with holy symbols, and over 2 agonizing years was observed levitating, vomiting glass, nails, and blood, as well as speaking in 6 different languages other than her native tongue. And finally, at the end of the 2-year bi-weekly cycle, she finally proclaimed that the demons were gone, and that Jesus was the victor. Number 3. Don Decker, the Rain Man. Don Decker is known to the world as the Rain Man. His story is arguably one of the most well-documented paranormal events in recent history. Its credibility is based on the accounts of many witnesses who were law enforcement professionals. This bizarre story began on February 24, 1983, in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, after Don Decker's grandfather, James Kissow, passed away. While others mourned, Don Decker was finally feeling a sense of peace for the very first time, and what the others didn't know was that his grandfather had been physically abusing Don since he was a young child. Don at the time was in jail but was granted furlough to be able to attend the funeral, and at the conclusion of the funeral, Don Decker was invited to stay the night with Bob and Janine Kiefer, who were friends of the family and quite fond of Don. It was later that evening when Don began to sense something wasn't right. A deep chill began to grip him, and Don quickly fell into a trance-like state. The Kiefers, perplexed at what had occurred, suddenly noticed water dripping from the living room ceiling and walls. The Kiefers then called their landlord, the only one that could possibly understand what was going on with their water pipes. And when he arrived, he too had no answers, because there were no water pipes in the area where the leaks were coming from. And in fact, the leaks became worse and started coming up through the floors as well as the ceiling and the walls. Unsure of what to do, Ron called his wife and explained the situation at the Kiefer residence. He then called the police. It was patrolman Richard Wober who was the first to arrive at the scene. It only took a few minutes for the patrolman to become drenched in water after entering the home, and this is what he described the night he entered the Kiefer residence. We were standing just inside the front door amid this droplet of water traveling horizontally. It passed between us and traveled into the next room. Officer John Bojan, who joined the other patrolmen, also witnessed the events at the Kiefer residence. As the officers tried to make sense of the situation, they noticed Don was in a trance-like state. The officers asked the Kiefers to take Don out of the home and sit him down at a pizzeria that was located a short distance from the residence. As soon as the Kiefers and Don left, the house returned to normal. This correlation didn't go unnoticed, and Ron found himself wondering if the Kiefers or Don were responsible for the incident. Strangely enough, the phenomenon began to transpire at the pizzeria as well, and as the rain continued, Don Decker, now back in a trance-like state, began to levitate towards the ceiling. This was witnessed by both of the officers at the scene, and one of the officers placed his cross necklace upon Don, who began to scream, saying that it was burning him. After the necklace was removed, it was burning hot and charred black. But the strange behavior didn't stop there. Shortly after this, Don was returned to jail to continue his sentence, and while sitting in his cell wondering if he could control the rain, as soon as the thought entered his mind, the rain began to pour from the ceiling of the cell, as well as the walls, vertically. A guard making his rounds saw the phenomenon taking place and told Don that he could get him a change of clothes if he could make it rain in the warden's office. Lieutenant David Keenhold temporarily manned the warden position. Keenhold had no idea who Don Decker was or anything regarding what had occurred at the Kiefer residence or the pizzeria, and when the guard entered the office, he looked around, inspecting the room until he saw Keenhold. He asked Keenhold to look at his shirt, and it was soaking wet. And right about the center of my sternum, about 4 inches long and 2 inches wide, I was saturated with water. I was startled. I was scared. The officer was frightened at the particular time, and I just didn't have an explanation as to why it happened. Lieutenant Keenhold, finally understanding what was going on, called his friend Reverend William Blackburn and urgently asked him to go see Don Decker. Reverend Blackburn agreed and approached Don Decker's cell, and after being briefed on everything that had transpired since Don went on furlough, he accused Don of making everything up. But this accusation did not sit well with Don. His demeanor changed and his cell suddenly became filled with a strong odor. Some witnesses described the smell like that of death, but multiplied by 5. Then the rain reappeared once again. The Reverend described the misty rain as the devil's rain. Reverend Blackburn then proceeded to pray over Don Decker, and after several minutes of prayers later, the rain dissipated and was never seen again. Whatever was haunting Don Decker certainly was not of this world. Number 2. Roland Doe. In 1949 in Maryland, a 13-year-old boy was mourning the loss of his beloved aunt when he began to see and hear strange things. Soon after this, he became possessed. He was witnessed by his family talking and spilling their deepest and darkest secrets, moving objects at will across the room, uttering blasphemous statements, among other activity. As the possession worsened, Roland began demonstrating violent superhuman strength, and this is when his parents took him to St. Louis in 1949 for a weeks-long exorcism, now known as the St. Louis exorcism, the story in which The Exorcist is based off of. The boy was taken to a prominent hospital in the city at the time, and had been moved to a private floor in the psychiatric unit due to his behavior and subsequential activities scaring other patients and staff. The 2 Jesuit priests who were sent to administer the exorcism noted that the activity could be seen from the ground as they approached the hospital, such as lights flickering on and off in multiple rooms all at once. When they finally made it to the upper levels of the structure, the priests could smell a strong scent of sulfur as they approached the boy's room. When they made it to the room, the boy began to mock them in Latin, fluently. He was then asked to prove who he was, and shortly after this, he simply touched the priest's vestment, and it burst into separated strands of fabric. Shocked and knowing that they had their hands full, the priest began the ritual. After multiple sessions and multiple harmful attacks, observing levitation, superhuman strength, and otherworldly knowledge and more, the boy at last exclaimed that he saw Saint Michael the Archangel drive the demons away with a flaming sword, and then he slowly but surely returned to normal. He then went on to grow up and pursue a normal life. But one of the priests who performed the exorcism, when contacted when the famous book The Exorcism was being written, was asked if the case was the real deal, and his response to me was priceless. He said, and I quote, "I had no doubt about it then, and I have no doubt about it now. What was in that room that night was the otherworldly force we call the devil in the flesh." Number 1. Anneliese Michel. Though many may not know it, the horrifying events of the 2005 film The Exorcism of Emily Rose were not entirely fictional, but rather were based on the actual experiences of a German girl named Anneliese Michel. Anneliese Michel grew up devoutly Catholic in Bavaria, West Germany in the 1960s, where she attended Mass twice a week. When Anneliese was 16, she suddenly blacked out at school and began walking around dazed. Though Anneliese didn't remember the event, her friends and family said she was in a trance-like state. A year later, Anneliese experienced a similar occurrence, where she woke up in a trance wet in her bed. Her body also went through a series of convulsions, causing her to shake uncontrollably. After the second time, Anneliese visited a neurologist who diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy, a disorder that causes seizure, loss of memory, and experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations. After her diagnosis, Anneliese began taking her medication for her epilepsy and enrolled in the University of Würzburg in 1973. However, the drugs she was given failed to help her, and as the year progressed, her condition began to deteriorate. Though she was still taking her medication, Anneliese began to believe that she was possessed by a demon and that she needed to find a solution outside of medicine. She began to see the face of the devil wherever she went, and she heard demons whispering in her ears. When she heard demons telling her that she was damned and that she would rot in hell while she was praying, she concluded that the devil must be possessing her. Anneliese sought out priests to help her with her demonic possession, but all the clergy she approached rejected her request, saying that she would seek medical help and that they needed permission from the bishop anyways. At this point, Anneliese's delusions had become extreme. Believing she was possessed, she ripped the clothes off her body, compulsively performed up to 400 squats a day, crawled under a table and barked like a dog for 2 days, ate spiders and coal, bit the head off a dead bird, and licked her own urine off the floor, among other things. Finally, she and her mother found a priest, Ernst Alt, who believed in her possession. He stated that she didn't look like an epileptic in later court documents. Anneliese wrote to Alt, "I am nothing. Everything about me is vanity. What should I do? I have to improve. You pray for me." And also once told him, "I want to suffer for other people, but this is so cruel." After getting permission from the church, the priest was instructed to carry out the rites of exorcism, but in total secret, because by this time, exorcism had all but faded in modern society. What ensued was 10 months and more than 68 exorcisms to try and cure her condition. And during those 68 exorcisms, it was revealed that she was possessed by 6 demons, including Satan himself. She broke the bones and ripped the tendons in her knees from continually kneeling in prayer. She would often fall catatonic onto the floor at random, and she broke her teeth from chewing holes in the walls, among other disturbing acts. At the end, after all her efforts were exhausted, she passed away from malnutrition and dehydration at the young age of 23. After her death, Anneliese's story became a national sensation in Germany, after her parents and the 2 priests who conducted the exorcism were charged with negligent homicide. The 2 priests were found guilty of manslaughter resulting from negligence and were sentenced to 6 months in jail, which was later suspended, and 3 years probation. The parents were exempt from any punishment as they had suffered enough. So was it a genuine case of possession or the result of horrible medical afflictions? The world may never know, but what was documented was a disturbing tale nonetheless. That's the end of our list. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe with the bell so that you never miss a video. And if you guys need something to make the creeps go away, check out one of my other videos here. This has been Cody with Mystery Archives. Thank you so much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful day.